My wife cheated on me with my parents' favorite son, my own brother. I used to believe that a calm life was a reward for patience. I had a simple job, one of those jobs people like to underestimate until they hear the numbers. It paid well enough to give my wife and me a comfortable house in a good state with clean streets and neighbors who waved even when they did not know your name. I was not flashy and never tried to be. I liked quiet mornings and predictable evenings, and I thought that was maturity. My family never really understood me, especially my parents, who always treated my younger brother like the main character while I played the role of reliable background furniture. I learned early that expecting approval from them was like waiting for rain in a drought. When I moved away and got married, I felt lighter, like I had finally stepped out of a room where the air was always thin. My wife felt like proof that I had built something of my own. Someone chose me, without comparison, without competition. For a while that belief kept me warm. Then my family started visiting more often. My parents smiled more than usual, and my brother came along with that same charm that always worked on everyone except me. He laughed loudly, filled the room, told stories that somehow always made him look impressive. I noticed small things. First, the way he stood too close to my wife, the way he touched her arm when he laughed, the way his eyes followed her when she left the room. I told myself I was projecting old resentment onto harmless behavior. When you grow up second best, you learn to doubt your own instincts. One evening after they left, I joked about it lightly, and my wife laughed too quickly and said I was imagining things. She kissed my cheek and told me not to be silly. The next visit, the same things happened again, and this time it stayed with me like a song you cannot turn off. I pulled my brother aside and told him to back off in the calm voice of a man trying to be reasonable. He looked offended, then amused, then offended again, and told everyone I was being paranoid. My parents agreed immediately, and my wife avoided my eyes. That should have been my first real warning, but I ignored it because ignoring things had always been my survival skill. My birthday was coming up, and I decided to host a big gathering, maybe to prove to myself that everything was normal, maybe to drown suspicion in noise and smiles. The house filled with voices, laughter, music, glasses clinking, people congratulating me on another year like time itself was proud of me. I remember thinking how strange it was that I felt lonelier in a full house than I ever had alone. At some point, I spilled a drink on my shirt and excused myself to change. I walked down the hallway, still smiling, still playing the host in my head. When I opened my bedroom door, the noise from the party disappeared like someone had turned a switch. What I saw did not need explanation and did not ask for permission to exist. My mind froze before my body did, and for a few seconds I was not a man with a past or a future. I was just someone standing in a doorway. My wife stepped toward me, saying my name, saying it was not what it looked like, saying words that sounded borrowed. I took a step back because instinct finally woke up. I closed the door quietly like I was leaving a library. I grabbed my jacket from the chair and walked out of my own birthday without saying goodbye. Behind me, I heard her calling my name, then running, then stopping. I did not look back because I already knew what I would see. That night I drove without direction until the lights blurred and my hands stopped shaking. I checked into a hotel under my own name and slept in clothes that smelled like someone else's house. In the morning, I felt clear in a way that scared me. I made one phone call and asked my friend to do something for me without explanation. As I hung up, I realized the party was probably still being talked about and my absence explained away. They had always been good at explaining me away. I looked at my reflection, and for the first time, I did not see the quiet brother or the easy husband. I saw someone standing at the edge of a decision, and I knew this was only the beginning. I spent that morning in the hotel room listening to silence like it was giving me instructions. My phone kept lighting up with missed calls, messages, apologies, explanations, accusations wrapped as concern. I did not open a single one. Clarity is fragile, and I was not about to let noise break it. My friend arrived by afternoon with my clothes, my documents, my laptop, and a look that told me he had seen enough to not ask questions. He just nodded and said, "You did the right thing," even though neither of us knew what right looked like yet. I changed into clean clothes that felt unfamiliar, like a costume for a new role. Then I drove straight to a lawyer whose name I had saved years ago after watching a coworker lose everything by being nice during a divorce. The lawyer listened without interrupting and slid a folder across the desk like this was not her first time watching someone rewrite their life. She did not ask why I waited or how I felt. She just asked what I wanted. That question surprised me more than the betrayal because no one had asked me that in a very long time. I said I want peace, and she nodded like peace was something that could be itemized and filed. Papers were prepared, signatures practiced like rehearsals for a performance I did not want to star in but refused to walk away from. As I left her office, my phone buzzed again, this time from my parents asking where I had gone and why the party ended so suddenly. I laughed out loud in my car, because even now the concern was about the event, not the man. I replied with one line saying I needed space and turned the phone off. The next few days felt unreal, like living behind glass. I stayed at the hotel, avoiding familiar streets, avoiding my house, avoiding memories that still thought they belonged to me. My wife sent long messages full of tears and promises, and the same sentence repeated in different ways. It meant nothing. It was a mistake. What struck me was how rehearsed it all sounded, like she had been preparing for the possibility of being caught. My brother sent one message too, saying we needed to talk, like this was a misunderstanding between equals. I deleted it without reading twice. When the papers were ready, I drove to the house we once called ours. The driveway looked the same, the door the same, even the welcome mat still smiled. She opened the door with red eyes and hope clinging to her voice. She cried, said my name, reached for my hand, and I stepped back, not in anger, but in self-respect. I handed her the documents and told her calmly that I had already left emotionally, and paperwork was just the echo. She asked if we could fix this, if I could forgive her, if family meant nothing to me. That word family hit harder than her tears because she knew exactly where to aim. I told her family should feel safe, and I had not felt safe in a long time. She asked about my brother, and I said he stopped being my concern the moment he forgot he was my brother. My parents arrived unannounced, drawn by drama like gravity. They immediately took her side, saying people make mistakes, saying I was being cold, saying blood is blood. I smiled at that, because blood had never protected me before. I told them quietly that I was done playing the role they wrote for me, and that this story would move forward without their edits. I left before anyone could argue, because I had learned that walking away at the right moment is power, not weakness. Outside, the air felt lighter, and for the first time since my birthday, I breathed fully. I did not know what the next chapter looked like yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer the man who ignored his instincts to keep the peace, and whatever came next would be built on truth, even if it stood alone. The days after that confrontation moved slowly, like time was testing whether I was serious about choosing myself. I stayed in the hotel longer than planned, not because I was hiding, but because I was observing my own thoughts like a scientist watching a new species. Anger came and went, but it was not loud, it was precise. What surprised me was relief. Deep, quiet relief, like finally setting down a heavy bag you forgot you were carrying. My parents kept calling, leaving messages that sounded less concerned and more offended, as if my refusal to return to the old script was a personal attack. My brother went silent, which somehow felt louder than his excuses would have been. Then something unexpected happened. My wife stopped begging and started accusing. The messages changed tones, saying I was abandoning her, saying I was dramatic, saying a real man would fight for his marriage. I almost thanked her out loud, because nothing confirms a decision like watching someone reveal who they are when they do not get what they want. My lawyer called to say things were moving faster than expected because my wife wanted to settle quietly. That word quietly made me smile, because silence had never been her strength. I agreed because peace was still my priority, not punishment. One evening, my friend convinced me to get out of the hotel and join him for dinner. Halfway through the meal, he told me something he had hesitated to share. When he went to collect my things, he noticed my brother's car parked a few streets away, and when he entered the house, my wife seemed less surprised than she should have been. That detail clicked into place like the final piece of a puzzle I had been pretending was incomplete. This was not a moment of weakness, this was a pattern. With rehearsal and timing. Strangely, that knowledge did not hurt, it clarified. I thanked my friend and felt something settle inside me, like a verdict finally delivered. The next day, my parents showed up at the hotel uninvited. They said they were worried about me, but their words circled back to embarrassment and what people would think. My mother cried, saying I was tearing the family apart, and my father said I needed to stop overreacting. I listened calmly, and then told them the truth, that I had spent my whole life shrinking myself to keep their version of family intact, and it never made me feel loved. I said I was done negotiating my self-respect for approval. My mother looked stunned, like I had spoken a foreign language. My father went quiet, which told me everything I needed to know. They left without hugging me, and I did not chase them. That night, alone again, I realized I was not lonely. I was just alone, and there is a difference. I I started looking at apartments closer to work. Imagining mornings that belonged only to me, my phone buzzed once more with a message from my wife saying she would do anything therapy space-time distance. I typed a response, then erased it because closure does not always need an audience. I turned the phone off and opened the window, letting city noise replace old memories. Somewhere between car horns and distant laughter, I felt something like excitement. Not for revenge, not for a new relationship, but for the unknown version of myself that no longer needed to be chosen because he had already chosen himself. And as I lay back on the bed, I understood that betrayal had not ended my story. It had redirected it. And for the first time, I was curious about where it would go next. I moved into a small apartment near my office, the kind of place that does not try to impress anyone, but keeps its promises. The first night there, I slept better than I had in years because the silence belonged to me. I set routines, simple ones: morning coffee, evening walks, weekend grocery runs that felt almost ceremonial. Rebuilding is quiet work, and I treated it with respect. The divorce process continued smoothly on paper, but emotionally it tried to sneak back in through unexpected doors. Mutual friends began choosing sides or pretending there were no sides, which somehow felt worse. Some avoided me, others asked questions they were not entitled to. I answered politely and briefly because I had learned that not every truth needs to be explained. Then came the call I did not expect. It was my brother asking to meet. He said he wanted to explain, to clear the air, to fix what he had broken. I agreed, not because I owed him anything, but because I wanted to see who he was without the audience that always protected him. We met at a quiet cafe, and when he walked in, he looked smaller, not physically, but energetically, like someone who had lost their reflection. He talked for a long time about confusion, about feelings, about mistakes, about how none of it was intentional. I listened without interrupting, and when he finished, I told him something that surprised us both. I said intent does not matter when trust is gone, and that love does not grow in secrecy, it rots there. He tried to bring up our childhood, how our parents compared us, how he always felt pressure to be better. I laughed softly and said, you were always better in their eyes, you just wanted what was mine too. He flinched because truth does that when it lands clean. I stood up, paid for my coffee, and told him I hoped he figured himself out, but I would not be part of that process. As I walked away, I felt no triumph, just closure. A few days later, my wife signed the final documents without drama. She looked tired, older somehow, and when she asked if I hated her, I said no, because hate would mean I was still tied to her. I wished her well, and meant it in the distant, polite way you wish a stranger well. When it was officially over, I celebrated alone with takeout and a movie, and I realized that joy does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it just sits with you comfortably. Weeks passed, and my parents went silent completely, which hurt in a dull, echoing way, but also freed me. Without their constant expectations, I noticed how much mental space opened up. I started taking classes after work, something I had postponed for years because it did not fit the version of me everyone expected. I laughed more genuinely, laughed at myself, laughed at small inconveniences instead of absorbing them. One evening, as I walked back to my apartment, I passed my old house and did not slow down. That was when I knew I was moving forward, not by forgetting, but by outgrowing. Betrayal had tried to define me as naive, weak, replaceable. But standing there under streetlights that did not know my history, I understood something simple and powerful. Loyalty to others means nothing if you betray yourself first, and I promised myself I would never make that mistake again. The story was no longer about what was taken from me, but about what I refused to lose, and that changed everything. By the time autumn arrived, my life had settled into a rhythm that felt earned, not borrowed from someone else's expectations. Work was steady, and I found myself more focused than ever, as if removing emotional noise sharpened everything else. My coworkers noticed, and one of them joked that divorce looked good on me. I laughed and told him it was not divorce, it was clarity. Weekends became my favorite invention. I explored parts of the city I had ignored for years, cafes, bookstores, parks where nobody knew my history and did not need to. I started writing again, something I had abandoned long ago because it never seemed practical enough. Words came easily now because I was no longer censoring my own thoughts to keep the peace. Then the past tried one more time to knock. My mother called late one evening, her voice softer than I remembered. She said she had been thinking and wanted to talk. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet. We sat in her kitchen, the same one where I had grown up, feeling like a guest in my own home. She spoke carefully, saying she had not handled things well, saying she did what she thought was best for the family. I asked her whose family she meant because it had never felt like mine. She looked away, and for the first time admitted that she relied on me to be the strong one, the understanding one, because my brother needed more attention. I told her that being strong should never mean being invisible. She cried quietly, and I felt compassion without surrender. Forgiveness does not mean reopening doors, it just means not carrying bitterness. We parted with an understanding that things would be different, slower, more distant, but honest. That night, I slept well knowing I had spoken my truth without burning bridges. Not long after that, I ran into my ex by chance at a grocery store. She looked startled, then hopeful, then unsure. We exchanged polite words about weather and work, and it struck me how little power she had over me now. The moment passed like any other, and I walked away smiling at the ordinariness of it. Later, my brother tried to message me again, this time apologizing more directly, but I did not respond. Silence can be a boundary too. Something else shifted around that time. I started enjoying my own company deeply, not as a coping mechanism, but as a genuine preference. I learned to cook meals just for myself, take pride in small accomplishments, rearrange furniture without consulting anyone. Independence stopped feeling like loneliness and started feeling like ownership. One evening, my friend asked if I regretted leaving so decisively, without confrontation, without drama. I told him that dignity is quieter than revenge, but lasts longer. Looking back, I realized my birthday had not been ruined, it had been revealed. It showed me the truth about the people closest to me and about myself. I had always been capable of walking away, I just needed permission, which I finally gave myself. As the year turned, I made no grand resolutions, just a simple commitment to choose environments that chose me back. And in that choice, I felt stronger than I ever had while trying to hold broken things together. The past had lost its grip, not because it apologized, but because I no longer needed it to. And that was the real victory. Winter came quietly, and for the first time, I did not brace myself for it. Cold mornings felt honest and clean, like the air was not pretending to be anything else. My life had narrowed in the best way: fewer people, fewer obligations, fewer explanations. I realized how much energy I used to spend translating myself so others would feel comfortable. Now my words came out plain and accurate, and whoever stayed could keep up. Work offered me a new opportunity, a role that required relocation for a few months. Old me would have hesitated, worrying about what it would disrupt. New me said yes before doubt could clear its throat. The temporary move gave me distance, not just geographically, but emotionally. I saw my past like a city skyline from far away, still recognizable, but no longer enclosing me. During that time, I heard through mutual acquaintances that my brother and my ex had tried to make something official and failed quickly. There was no satisfaction in that information, only confirmation. People who bond through betrayal rarely trust each other. My parents attempted another family gathering and extended an invitation framed as reconciliation. I declined politely without explanation and felt no guilt. Boundaries do not need speeches. Instead, I spent the holiday with friends who laughed easily and asked nothing from me except my presence. I noticed how light that felt. One evening, alone in my temporary apartment, I caught myself smiling at nothing in particular and realized I was genuinely content. Not excited, not distracted, just settled. That state used to scare me because I confused chaos with passion and calm with boredom. Now I understood that peace is not empty, it is spacious. I started mentoring a younger coworker who reminded me of myself years ago, eager, capable, and constantly doubting his own instincts. I told him something I wish I had heard earlier: trust what makes you uncomfortable, it is usually trying to protect you. Saying it out loud felt like closing a loop. As my assignment ended, and I returned home, I noticed the city welcomed me differently, or maybe I was the one arriving differently. I did not rush into anything new, I let things unfold at their own pace. Invitations came and went, and I chose based on desire, not obligation. The story people used to whisper about me faded because I stopped feeding it with reactions. Reputation is a mirror, and I had turned away. One afternoon, I found the jacket I had worn on my birthday. The night everything changed. I held it for a moment, then donated it without ceremony. Letting go does not always require emotion. Sometimes it is just a decision. Standing there, I understood that my life was no longer defined by the moment I walked away, but by everything I built afterward. Betrayal had been a catalyst, not a conclusion, and I felt ready, not for something specific, but for whatever came next, without fear, because I knew now that even if everything fell apart again, I would recognize the signs sooner and trust myself faster. and that confidence was unshakable. Spring arrived like a quiet agreement between the world and my patience. I noticed it in small things: first lighter mornings, longer walks, the way people smiled without realizing why. My life did not suddenly transform into something dramatic, and that was the point. Stability became my luxury and choice my privilege. I settled fully back into my city, not as someone returning, but as someone arriving for the first time. The apartment felt complete now, not because it was perfect, but because nothing in it carried a memory that hurt. I hosted friends occasionally, cooked, laughed, told stories that no longer needed careful editing. At one dinner, someone asked about my family, and I answered honestly, without bitterness, without disguise. I said we were distant and left it at that, and nobody pushed, because confidence does not invite interrogation. My parents eventually learned to respect the silence, and my brother became a name I rarely thought about. Not because I forced myself to forget, but because relevance fades naturally when you stop feeding it. One afternoon, I ran into my ex again. This time, she looked calmer, more grounded, and for a moment we talked like two people who had once shared a language but no longer needed to speak it. She said she hoped I was happy, and I said I was, and meant it without proving anything. Walking away, I felt gratitude, not for the pain but for the clarity it had given me. Later that evening, I sat alone on my balcony watching the city lights come on one by one and reflected on how close I had come to staying in a life that slowly erased me. I understood then that my strength was never loud, it was consistent. I had not won by destroying anyone or exposing secrets or demanding apologies. I had won by choosing dignity when chaos invited me to react, by walking away when staying would have meant betraying myself, by rebuilding without bitterness and forgiving without returning. My birthday came around again, and this time I did nothing special, just took the day off, went for a long walk, treated myself to a meal I liked. There was no party, no crowd, no performance, and yet I felt more celebrated than ever, because I was present in my own life fully and without distraction. As night fell, I smiled at the quiet irony that the worst day of my life had given birth to the best version of me. I raised a glass alone, not in sadness, but in respect for the man who finally listened to his instincts and trusted them. The story did not end with loss, it ended with ownership. And that is how I knew without any doubt that I had not just survived betrayal, I had outgrown it.